yes. Oh, yes, you could.
But what does a light switch turn on then?
Yeah, and that would have to, you would have to assume.
So
it's
that's why I
overhead.
was thinking that if we had a light that would represent a kitchen light,
Right.
right?
Oh, yeah, I see what you mean. I was just thinking that if we see a sky, do we just...
This is the workshop at the Community Players Studio in Concord, New Hampshire. The director, set designer, and technical director are discussing the finishing touches for the stage set for an upcoming production of Barefoot in the Park. The Community Players, a nonprofit and mostly volunteer organization, are the proud owners of their own studio facility, where they rehearse, make costumes, store props, and build scenery exactly as it will later appear on a stage.
You don't see it, but hanging behind here, there is going to be a winter scene. So we made a snow machine that rotates, so to speak, and someone in the wings can work it. So as you're looking at it in the evening, you'll see snow happening behind the window. And that's another good thing for having something large like this, because the audience can get to really pretty. Rather than a small window, if you're not looking at that window, you're not going to see it. But this is so big that the audience can't miss it.
The Players, as they are known in the community, have been in existence since 1927, one of the oldest community theaters in New England. They've put on a season of live theater every year, with the exception of 3 years during the Second World War and during the recent pandemic. The stage set for this play began construction in March of 2020, scheduled for a weekend of performances in early May that year. It has been here for over 17 months, waiting to go on.
We had no idea when we'd be able to put on the show.
Co-director John Conlon recalls halting the production for a year and a half.
I guess around February of 2020. And of course, as you all know, COVID-19 came into play shortly after that. So we had to break rehearsals at that point with no idea as to whether we'd be able to do the show or not.
After the long hiatus, the production has finally been given performance dates in October 2021 at Concord City Auditorium, downtown.
Bob Stewart was my mentor. He was the person I got involved with theater for the first time in high school at Bishop Brady High School. He always told me that you should enjoy everything about theater, the people, the experience. So whether you're involved in one show or in 50 shows, it's the people that get you coming back.
The 95-year journey for the Community Players of Concord has always been about the members of the past encouraging and inspiring the members of the next generation. It is, in fact, their mission, played out through many years of encouraging participation and fostering new talent, through a depression, a world war, and changing times. But the Players contributed to the community, donating to charities, putting on over 400 plays and musicals as they saved, struggled, shared resources, and made their own history along the way. It had been an unseasonably warm November, historian Bob Stewart wrote. The Concord Monitor reported that a rose bloomed in Boscawen. An advertisement also appeared in the Monitor Patriot, a 2-cent newspaper, for a one-night performance of a stage comedy by Hubert Henry Davies titled The Mollusk. Tickets were 75 cents each, with all profit going to flood relief in Vermont. The recent disaster took 84 lives and damaged property, roads, and rail lines in the neighboring state. In Concord, the New Hampshire state capital, and a town of 25,000, 2 movies, Marion Davies at the Capitol Theater or Tom Megan at the Star, were the only entertainment competition on the night of November 15th, 1927. But what led up to that night in the theater had begun only a few short months before.
With tentative plans for the production of its first play in October, the Community Players of Concord, a little theater group, was permanently organized last evening. The meeting, which was held at the residence of Mr. and Mrs. Carl B. Bear, 31 Rinch Road, was well attended. Enthusiasm in this new venture ran high, and many suggestions were considered regarding details of the project.
The meeting had been called by Dr. Harry O. Barnes, who had been floating the idea of a local theater group with interested thespians ever since seeing a stage version of The Goose Hangs High put on by college students the previous winter. Their highly productive meeting was attended by 16 original members, who adopted bylaws, elected a board, and even selected their first production. 2 weeks before the performance, the community players decided to donate any profit from the production to Red Cross flood relief. Although their mission made no mention of charitable donations, the players continued to donate some or all of their profits to charities for the better part of 3 decades, or put on their plays specifically for local nonprofits as their sponsors. The Mollusk received a glowing review in the Monitor Patriot. Singled out for special notice was a charter member of the players named Harold Cheney, who became well known for hosting 2 decades of annual meetings with lobster and steamed clams. Armed with 1 good review, a full measure of enthusiasm, and not too much else, the new theater group put on a play the following March, and a year later an evening of 1 acts. Most titles of their plays are unfamiliar today, yet someone in the group had a nose for good playwriting, with works by authors such as James M. Barrie, A. A. Milne, and George S. Kaufman represented among their early productions. The first cast photograph is from the Kaufman-Connolly comedy Dulcie in 1930, in which stage curtains provide the setting. From their beginning, the group functioned very much like a repertory company, with the charter members appearing together in play after play, and often in similar roles. Note that many of the same names appear and reappear in successive productions. When additional actors were needed, members brought in spouses and friends to complete the cast. From their beginning, the players had no building of their own, often holding meetings and rehearsals in private homes or apartments. Board meetings were held in downtown offices, including the State House, and even once in Baker Funeral Home. The annual meeting was held in Apple Tree Bookshop, rented for the occasion for $2. In the fall of 1929, just weeks after the stock market crash, it was decided to postpone the next show till January. And for some reason, doing a religious play for Lent was discussed. With the noted sum of $7.63 in the black, the players entered their 3rd season, traveling light, but traveling frequently and often on short notice. Once they'd mounted a production, it often became part of their repertoire, and they'd pack up their 1-box set and travel up Warren Street to do a benefit at the high school for Concord Women's College Club, or even all the way to Enfield, New Hampshire to perform their latest comedy.
Greatest acting out of the players were those cold winter nights when we went to unheated halls, rehearsed in ski clothes and sat down in what was supposed to be a drawing room in evening clothes, and I think that was some pretty good acting.
Oh, yes. With our overshoes.
Right.
Coats, heavy bundles, white scarves, hats.
Well, I've heard that when you rehearsed in the Ward House, you'd have to bring your own wood.
Yes. I was going to say,
Yes,
and we did. We remember and build a fire and get it warm enough. And it got warm about the time when we were ready to leave.
I remember.
In spite of wrapping up season number 5 with all of $216, the players were, in the words of writer Nylene Morrison, on their own during these years.
They were feeling their way in matters of acting, stagecraft, and direction. The players themselves took turns as directors. In a period where directors were little more than prompters, recruited non-players sometimes chose not to learn their lines until the night of the performance. Far from absent was a spirit of tomfoolery, which too often made a play more humorous than intended.
As they planned for a fall production of Peg o' My Heart, Arthur Bean suggested the players hire a professional coach. And so, at the height of the Depression, the players set aside the sum of $75, the equivalent of $1,500 today, and hired Viroqua Lovgren. Mrs. Lovgren, the wife of the rector of St. Paul's Church, Reverend Bernard Lovgren, came to be known as the guiding light of the community players. In a span of 11 years, she not only directed 26 main stage plays, gave private lessons in speaking and acting, but instilled practices and principles of theater which formed tenets of the community players that remain today.
No detail of production or of direction was neglected by Mrs. Lovgren. Realism was her philosophy of play production, in interpretation, settings, and properties. She molded the group into a disciplined whole. Mrs. Lovgren is in the foreground, filling in for an actor who took sick at the last minute.
She taught us the value of detailed work in the play, not just a slap-happy job. She brought all the professionalism to us, and she brought all of the wealth of knowledge. The least role is just as important as the greatest role in the play. The most trivial part is just as important, and the player is just as important to the production as a whole. We work for a production as a whole, and I think we've learned that from Mrs. Lovgren.
From her first play, Viroqua Lovgren initiated opening auditions to the public, so non-members could compete with players' members for parts. Her ambitious productions included the psychological thriller Night Must Fall and Shakespeare's Twelfth Night, for which Mrs. Lovgren required Harold Chaney and Winslow Osborne to take private fencing lessons at St. Paul's School. For The Petrified Forest, the Bogart classic about a gangster holed up in an Arizona roadhouse, Mrs. Lovgren's passion for realistic costumes and props drove Players President Dr. Osmond Strong to a frenzy of dictated letters.
To the Athletic Director, University of Nevada. Dear sir, if we could obtain a football jersey with the number 42 on it, that would be most appreciated. Your service and supply company. Gentlemen, we are in search of a machine gun that can be fired with blanks.
Dear Dr. Strong, in reply to your letter of January 23rd, we do not carry machine guns. You might want to try your American Legion in Concord, New Hampshire.
It was noted that occasional missteps occurred even on Lovgren shows, too. A local reviewer gave 1934's Another Language the worst notice the players ever received.
The performance was unforgettable because it shared the not altogether unique distinction of being almost everything it shouldn't be.
And one 1935 play was marred by a bout of post-prohibition drinking backstage, a production entitled The Vinegar Tree. 3 years later, Mrs. Lovgren was granted a raise and a signed contract at her request, mainly requiring the board to provide her with adequate production staff and back her up if she might need to dismiss an actor. Activity within the players' membership in the years before the war, and well before television, was full of social events, made possible by volunteers and the hospitality of members.
Mrs. Hammond, the program chairman, planned a delightful Halloween party, which everyone greatly enjoyed. A program of mountain music and appropriate refreshments completed the evening.
The players accepted with pleasure an invitation from Mr. and Mrs. Winslow Osborne to hold a Christmas party in their home on the evening of December 14th. All are asked to bring a 10-cent present for the tree.
We close our season as we did last year, thanks to the kindness of Mr. and Mrs. Cheney, with a lobster supper at their summer cottage at Riverhill.
It has been an unusual year in several ways, and the possibility the next one will be even more so, with 3 of our men now in service. The world appears to be embarked on a time of stress and trouble, and unpleasant events are coming closer. Respectfully submitted, Marion M. Brown, May 21, 1941.
There were no main stage plays in the fall of 1941. More players withdrew to enlist in the service. A new radio station in Manchester, WMUR, contacted the group about hosting a Sunday night radio program. The community players produced 10 episodes, resulting in a flood of postcards from new fans in central New Hampshire. A high point was 1942's play Ladies in Retirement, a thriller about a rich woman's companion who murders her boss to provide security for her 2 dotty sisters.
Do you remember, Isla, Ladies in Retirement? Do you remember the night that Betty Davis came? Yes. And we were all keyed up to such a pitch that we didn't know whether we could get through the play or not. And then we wondered, of course, what she would think of it, and whether she would think we were just people trying to act, or whether she would think we had a degree of professionalism. And then she came up on stage afterwards and talked to the audience and talked about our play and what we did. Yes, and she came up just raving mad about it. She thought it was the most marvelous thing, and horrified, because at that time they were only doing one performance a night. That was it. One performance, one night. She said, "You mean you go to all this work just to do one show? Why, you ought to go on for weeks."
The players raised nearly $800 for the Red Cross, with a pre-planned personal appearance by Betty Davis, who autographed photos during intermission. The Players' Archives also revealed the first evidence of a crew show, a song parody based on Gilbert and Sullivan's Titwillow, a song used in the play to counterpoint the climactic murder.
Then Ellen completed her dastardly plotty to kill, to kill, to kill.
At the annual meeting, motion was made by Dr. Strong and Arthur Bean that a special page be inserted into the Secretary's records for the community players' roll of honor of men in the armed services. Perhaps it would be in keeping with circumstances to change this wording to read members in the armed services, as the former wording would not include female members. It was further suggested that a carton of cigarettes be sent to all the boys from the players.
Thanks for the carton at Chesterfield's. I shall always revere my brief association with the players. How Harriet Strong tried to drag lines out of me, and Mrs. Lovgren tried unsuccessfully to drill them into me.
Cigarettes are like diamonds in the jungle.
I shall be thinking of you all eating lobster tonight. Uncle Sam has finally given me a part to play in this show.
Dorothy Corbett kept up correspondence with the group from the Naval Training Station in Bloomington, Indiana.
Wish I could be in a play and rehearse until midnight. It would be fun to stay up past 10 o'clock. The best of holidays for all. Seaman Corbett.
The 1942-43 season saw only one play on stage, a benefit for United War Community Chest entitled A Murder Has Been Arranged, contributing $319 to the charity. Players' social events were curtailed.
The Armed Services has continued to shrink our membership. The group has but 4 active men in its midst.
It would be more than 2 full seasons before the community players were to return to the public stage in Concord.
At this time, let us take a long-range viewpoint and keep our eyes clearly of the aim of the players, and we shall take renewed courage that the present conditions will not deter us, but rather tend to challenge the initiative and resources of every member of the players. Respectfully submitted, Catherine R. Hochter, Secretary, June 17th, 1943.
The effects of the war on Concord life began to show more and more with the community players. The board meeting notes for 1943 to 1944 recorded only the following. All costumes were now stored in Dr. Strong's barn, a church in Bradford invited the players to perform, and the players were considering putting on Angel Street in the fall of 1945. Neither the play in Bradford nor the fall production in 45 ever happened. No plays were publicly produced that year, yet the players in Concord continued to meet and put on one-acts in private homes. And not even Hitler could stop Dad Cheney's lobster picnic by the Kentucky River. 1944 to 45 wasn't even a season, nor was it listed as one. All that exists is a poem, sent by Dick Bailey, dated December 17, 1944, saying thank you for a gift, a small handmade photo album of friends in the players far away.
To Ozzie and Harriet, up on the bike. It's lots more fun riding than taking a hike. Next come the Baileys, the whole damn crew. Without the old man, not a bad-looking few. And leave it to Lovgren's an ingenious trick, using a string that shudders to click. May St. Nicholas greet you with blessings as grand as he greeted me with this book in my hand.
The period of instability which followed the war also affected the community players. Although no meeting minutes exist for 45-46, the 18th season did leave behind the record of a spring production entitled Claudia. Luckily, the following season sprang to life with 2 wartime hits, the delayed thriller Angel Street and Noel Coward's comedy for war-weary London, Blithe Spirit. With non-musical dramas and comedies back on the boards, the players stepped up their game in 1948. A local attorney and his wife, Alva and Allison Sulloway, approached the group with an original show they'd written about a fictional Maine community experiencing a beach rights battle between entrenched Yankees and rich summer people. When the players agreed to present Winner Take All, which required a cast of 50, a large backstage crew, and the New Hampshire Symphony Orchestra, the Sulloways requested that profit be split between the theater group and the orchestra. Harriet Strong's November production attracted so much publicity that it scored a 4-page photo spread in Yankee magazine. Soon enough, statewide demand from other towns was such that the players took Winner Take All on the road to benefit their local charities, including a summer engagement under the stars. The founders of the Meadow Hearth in Hopkinton, Kurt and Grace Graff, also directed a main stage players production of Alice in Wonderland at the City Auditorium in 1949. The production is well remembered by audiences for the exceptional costumes borrowed from Chicago's Goodman Theater. Choreographer Paul Reck played the White Rabbit. The players also brought a number of plays to New Hampshire State Prison in the 50s, including The Philadelphia Story, The Solid Gold Cadillac, and The Happy Time. The Philip Barry comedy was also whisked off to perform at the Portsmouth Navy Yard in the same week, a sweetheart deal when the shipbuilders offered to transport the scenery both ways, and did. Approaching their 22nd season, the players decided to incorporate, not only for tax purposes and legal standing, but with an eye to finding a permanent home base in the near future, be it a rehearsal and storage facility, or possibly even a theater. Winslow Osborne provided legal expertise, and on May 24, 1949, the organization added Inc. to their legal moniker. Concurrently, the bylaws were revised, now requiring membership applications for players and a $1 fee, opening membership up to non-residents. Active participation was not only required, but reviewed annually by the board to remove non-active members from the roster. In April of 1952, the energy of the players' activities was heralded in the Boston Sunday Hometown Pictorial. After all, they'd been around for 25 years.
In the Concord Community Players, the New Hampshire capital city boasts one of the older little theater organizations in the United States. Next year, the group will celebrate its 25th anniversary. Perched on the pin block backstage, Dorothy Batalico takes time out at rehearsal for a run-over of her lines. "How much time to curtain?" asks this happy trio. Harriet Strong, Kit Dort, and Betty Lee Holmgren are 3 of the large and attractive membership. Setting a tie backstage, Gino Batalico engages in mysterious activities at the pin block. Gino has to know all the ropes. Al Murphy presides at the complicated switchboard, which controls all house and stage lighting. Much depends on Al's operation of these all-important levers. Time out for criticism. Director Dick Bailey points out errors in production of a scene. Each year, the players present 3 plays, with proceeds devoted to various charitable causes. The list for this season include Two Blind Mice, The Little Foxes, and Born Yesterday.
That same season, letters from 9 charities and nonprofits came knocking, requesting to sponsor community players' main stage shows. With each play running 2 nights, 6 charities were selected and required to pay $75 up front. Each charity had to supervise ticket sales and show publicity according to specific guidelines. Beyond the main stage shows, players' activity reached a galvanizing level in the early 1950s. Membership meetings featured themed entertainments, such as costume parties or cabaret nights where members could perform. There were makeup and hairstyling workshops, such as this one supervised by Ruth Osborne. Players' delegates were active in New England Theater Conference and the American National Theater Association, traveling to Boston and New York to meet with other theater groups and share insights and information on best practices. Harold Cheney led a committee to create a stunning silver and burgundy souvenir program to mark the players' 25th anniversary in 1952. The program was dedicated to Mrs. Lovgren, who wrote back from her home in Carmel, California.
You have accomplished much in the lifespan of your group and should feel very proud and happy over your efforts. My thanks for my place of honor in your book and remembrance in your hearts. Carry on.
By the mid-50s, the players were hitting a stride in consistency of their operations and annual functions. So much so that President Dot Corbett stated,
This report can list no major change, for it would be difficult to find or introduce any innovation in procedure when procedure so long established had been so carefully planned and so very workable.
Along with city theater goers and music lovers across the country, Concord took the shows of Rodgers and Hammerstein to their hearts, and the players teamed up with the Concord Music Club to co-produce 3 of them in 3 years: Oklahoma in 1956, South Pacific in 57, and Carousel in 1958. Musicals were necessarily more expensive to produce, and the players shared the costs, as well as the profits, with the Concord Music Club, who provided a good measure of the musical talent required. Oklahoma cost over $2,000 to produce, and grossed $4,500 in ticket sales. Each group netted over $1,000 in profit, and almost $1,500 each for South Pacific the following year. Harriet Strong led the vanguard as director of these productions, very often supervising 50 people on stage and 30-plus offstage. Trained by Mrs. Lovgren in the early 40s, Harriet was a stickler for well-organized production teams, often partnering with Paul Reck as choreographer, and the music club talents of James Bell, Angela Anacarico, and Dorothy Batalico. South Pacific, in 1957, should also be noted for the attendance of Governor Lane Dwinell, who sent a thank you note for the comps, and for the players' debut of Betty Abbott in the role of Nellie Forbush. Betty was a professional band singer who had once appeared on Broadway as a mermaid in a musical one-act entitled The Eccentricities of Davy Crockett. She appeared at the South Pacific tryouts with no fanfare and gave what amounted to a professional performance on the spot.
I loved Betty Abbott. We don't have anybody like Betty now. It's about what I can say. She was bold and brassy, and she was funny. She didn't have any trouble expressing herself, let's put it that way.
She just had that outgoing loving of people that just came through. And you couldn't fault her very often. Lots of times you have notes for actors and so forth, but not for Betty. She might come off after Lend Me a Little Christmas or something and say, how'd that go? And I'd say, very good. She said, I didn't quite get it there. I said, I knew when you didn't quite get it, so you take that out. And she laughed and she said, I like a director who knows what I'm doing.
Another notable South Pacific appearance was that of 10-year-old John Adams, who went on to compose operas such as Nixon in China, orchestral works, and chamber music, winning the Pulitzer Prize and 5 Grammys along the way. Carousel and Irving Berlin's Call Me Madam in 1959 proved to be more costly ventures, and as the players returned to a season ticket policy, the two groups agreed upon the players paying the music club a flat fee of $800. These exciting, large-scale musicals may have been the pride of the capital city, but they also brought up a number of issues behind the scenes that required attention. Rehearsal absences, difficulties in casting, budgeting, scheduling rehearsal locations, etc. Should backstage crew be allowed to become members? Are full orchestras too expensive? Should we return to using 2 pianos? And say, who's been drinking backstage? Finding a permanent home for the organization took serious shape in 1947, when a standing committee was established to facilitate the process. Many options, including purchasing a Lutheran church and even a Quonset hut, were considered, only to fall by the wayside. The players thought about renting storage space, but finally a deal was made for costumes to move back into the auditorium, this time into remodeled dressing rooms on the 3rd floor. When volunteer players proved in short supply to transport the costumes, the Girl Scouts stepped up. By 1958, the goal to find a player's place had become a driving force. The players realized that over the past 10 years they had provided sponsorships to 18 local organizations, totaling almost $12,000. In his annual report, President Ira Shanahoff stated,
"Sponsors do not provide us with funds. Therefore, if we wish to build or buy in the future, we have to change our method of operation. We therefore recommend that in the future we handle our own business and keep all profits."
The years of outgoing charity sponsorships seem to have been put to rest in 1962, with the Catholic Daughters sponsoring the play Strange Bedfellows. At the start of the 1960s, popular Broadway plays such as Picnic and The Time of the Cuckoo were presented, along with Tennessee Williams' The Rose Tattoo, as directed by Mike Plisco. An old-time melodrama titled Love Rides the Rails was performed at a membership meeting and even inspired a steam engine float for Concord's Appreciation Days in 1962, which took first prize. John Patrick's hit play Tea House of the August Moon, about life in Okinawa following World War II, was presented on a lavish scale. The casting of non-Japanese actors in Japanese roles is evident in this 1959 production. The large cast dramas that involved the whole organization and had once been a staple of the players were now few and far between. Terence Rattigan's drama Separate Tables featured early members, such as Ruth and Winslow Osborne, making one of their last appearances, appearing along with Bob Stewart, Clara Brogan, and Cammie Morrison. Ruth Osborne, who had acted in over 30 plays, served 3 terms as president, chaired committees, and supervised the junior players, was also remembered as a fine director trained by Mrs. Lovgren.
She was very much a lady, but she had an enormous amount of warmth if she got to know you. As a director, she invests her heart and soul in her cast and makes them believe that they are who the character calls for them to be. A group of us were invited to come on Sunday afternoon. I was told beforehand that this is very serious. You can't just go in there. This isn't fun time. And I said, "Oh, I know." And she said, Ruth has asked to have several children come that can give their perspective about the play. So we were seated in the second row. Ruth came over and said, "I'm looking for your opinion of the show from your own mind." She told us, "Don't try to look at it like you're 40 years old." She said, "I want to hear it from 8, 9, 10-year-old. And I want you afterwards to tell me and to tell others what you think of what you are going to watch." So after it was over, she came out and she said, "What did you think?" And all 4 of us it was wonderful. It was because it was looking at theater in a totally different way, beyond just listening to lines, some of which I didn't completely, understand or get what was going on, but watching it in its entirety up there. And she asked us, "Now, what did you like and what didn't you?" And we started to talk, and she said, "Wait, come with me." So we went up there, and then she said to the cast, she introduced us to the cast, and she introduced us and said, "They've been out there watching, and I'm going to allow them to have the floor and tell you what they thought of what they've just watched for the last couple of hours." And they applauded us after we each said our little bit about what we liked. I think made an enormous difference in my future appreciation of theater as an audience member, because I started to notice those things in shows going forward after that, which I probably wouldn't have. I would have just focused on who was talking. And she made everyone on stage an ensemble, and a fine-tuned ensemble that worked beautifully together.
But it was the success of large cast musicals that continued to take the spotlight. Brigadoon in 1960 and Kiss Me Kate in 1961, both featuring Frank Gardner as the musical lead, did well, though perhaps owing to cost-saving measures such as reducing the musical accompaniment to 2 pianos.
He was in several choruses. He was in a touring chorus of Army veterans when he got out of service. I don't believe he ever had any formal training as an actor, but he'd always been a singer, and he knew he could sing. I think he got some instruction from people he ran into during his kind of choral days, but he was mostly a technical worker at the Brattle, a set builder and so on. But it also exposed him to a number of people who were quite well known. Coming right out of World War II, the psychological need for normality drove a lot of this community building. You know, almost all the men in the players of the 50s and 60s were combat veterans. Many of them had undiagnosed PTSD. That closeness of community work was a real balm to them. They also had a kind of edginess because they survived, that they were carrying with them that wasn't fully processed. And you know, that really had a lot to do with the ambience of community activities during that time, why they clung to those things. It also made them responsive to people like Ruth Osborne and Harriet and my father, who did have professional experience and knew what they were doing. They knew, they listened to those people and incorporated what they had to say. And that really made the organization what it was in terms of its onstage quality.
In the fall of 1962, season tickets were discontinued, and single ticket prices for The King and I were raised to $3 for the best seating. The Harriet Strong production sold out 3 houses and grossed over $6,500. Photographer Bill Finney took the occasion to capture the show offstage as well as on. The players' level of achievement was recognized when they received a request from the professional Lakes Region Playhouse to bring the show to Lake Winnipesaukee as a preseason bonus event for their subscribers. Due to scheduling and the children involved, the players had to decline the offer. But it was nice to be asked.
The whole approach to community theater was quite different before the 70s. Often there'd be a whole bunch of us just at a rehearsal, playing alongside or sitting in the auditorium. I'd be playing with Eric or Paul Brogan or, you know, whoever others, Sylvia's kids would be there, and we would all just hang, you know, or do a little chore for somebody, or I'd sit in the pit and turn Angela Chiarico's pages.
It was just a family event, you were just all there.
It was definitely a family event. Yeah. behind the old players. First of all, everybody smoked then. Both my parents smoked, and most of the rest of the adults. And you didn't, and you could smoke wherever you were, right? Even in a theater.
In July of 1963, the Players purchased a former Baptist church from an optical company for $7,900 as a studio for the group. Although the building was only a block from the city auditorium, there were problems with the property almost from the week they moved in, including expenses, maintenance, and general management. Less than 10 years later, they sold the building, netting a badly needed $16,000 on the sale.
There wasn't enough room in there, really, for what they wanted to do. We rehearsed Hatful of Rain in there in 1971, and the place was pretty tight. Right. Because everything was stored along the sides. So you couldn't really carve out a representative rehearsal space in terms of the dimensions of the Audi.
At least on a few shows that I was in, that when they finished up the set and were ready to move into the Audi, they simply picked it up and walked it out the front door and down the street and in the back door of the Audi. It was a great way to promote the show. People would stop traffic in both directions. My most vivid memory, actually, of that studio was that this was in the mid-'60s when everybody smoked. And you would go in there, and the average rehearsal, there would be a pall of cigarette smoke that would hang right about here, right at nose level.
It's doubtful that a young high school English teacher named Harriet Strong could have imagined the influence she would have on the community Players when she and her husband, Dr. Osmond Strong, joined the group in 1934. Starting out in plays directed by Mrs. Lovgren, the couple appeared in 17 plays together, first known as The Lunts of Concord, and then as Ozzie and Harriet, enduring a measure of friendly joshing in TV's golden age. Harriet played leading roles in the 50s, in The Country Girl and I Remember Mama, but blossomed as a Lovgren-trained director with Our Town in 1950 and her string of large-cast musicals that lit up Concord's stage for over a decade. In 1964, the Strongs co-directed a national award-winning production of Inherit the Wind. Subsequently, Harriet inspired directors Bob Stewart, Alwyn Fine, and others as she remained active on casting committees and served as a warm and enthusiastic, yet seriously minded cheerleader for the organization for years to come.
She would sit down with a script and this chessboard and plot every single move, and it would take her most of the summer to do it. But by the time she was ready for auditions, which happened right after Labor Day, she knew exactly who she wanted in what roles. They'd have auditions for 2 nights and callbacks for 2 nights, and she would wind up with an ace cast that she would work ragged.
She knew what she wanted, and she knew how to pull it out of people. Nobody whispered back and forth to each other. If she was addressing the entire cast and talking about, different things after a rehearsal, every eye was riveted on her and everyone was listening. Nobody was poking someone next to them or making a little joke or anything else, because they knew she meant business.
She was extremely specific. This had both positive and negative effects. It tended to make everyone look like a puppet. However, I was 13 years old and I was in the chorus. So, on the other hand, she was extremely authoritative and she had control of that room, and there were 50 people in there, so she could keep it moving. She dressed for rehearsal. She wasn't kidding around.
I think I just didn't have the push at that point to try the dramas. I got to that, and Harriet drove me because she said, all you need is a sense of what's happening. In this show, just a sense of what's happening to all of these people. Do you want to pat someone on the back or kick that one in the A?
The one thing she taught me more than anything else was pictures. Whenever you do a show, you always have to be aware of the picture, the placement, and who's in front of who, I'll make sure, that nobody's covering any, and all that basic stuff. But that was her thing, pictures, as if you were taking a picture, and that's the way you want them to look. And that stuck with me.
In her later years, she would come to dress rehearsals because she really just couldn't handle coming to a full. And the rehearsal would end, and it was like the cast, all of the people that knew Harriet were just
waiting for her comments.
greeting Harriet.
Yeah.
I mean, it was the Harriet's in the house, right?
Yeah.
Right, and she was lovely and gracious and wonderful and kind. But she, so I remember that vividly, and she was just so. When I went to a show and Harriet was in the house, it was like, that's really special.
In September of 1977, the players gathered to celebrate their 50th anniversary with a musical review called A Celebration. On the following night, the community players took a moment to relax and socialize, but hard facts facing the organization could not be ignored. Ozzie Strong had passed away less than a year before, and the old guard was aging out. Second-generation players were few, and the seasonal demands on the same people were straining their commitment. Few directors were available, and audiences were not always showing up to see 5-year-old Broadway plays. Players' costumes and props had been moved from one unheated warehouse to another, suffering water damage and worse. Membership meetings had stopped, and the group had lost over $10,000 since the sale of the Union Street studio 4 years earlier. Everyone hoped some future leaders with fresh ideas might be celebrating with them in that very room.
Well, I was first introduced to the players back in the mid 70s. Well, the rehearsals when I first joined were in numerous places. Then once in a while, not for this show, but we had to rehearse in what they considered their so-called studio, which was at the prison. It was on the top. The building is no longer there. It was a huge old gray wooden building that was really suitable for a fire. It was ready.
The first players' studio that I recall was a warehouse building next to the prison. We were on the second floor. There was one area that was sectioned off for costumes, and all the set pieces were in another area. And I was doing a lot of lighting work, so we had to transport all that stuff up and down the stairs, miles and miles of cable and heavy light fixtures and so forth. So yeah, that was an adventure.
No running water,
Right.
no heat,
No bathrooms.
no bathrooms,
We had to
right?
go to used to be Blake's where the hood plant is
Yes,
now, and use the facilities there
In
because
the
we couldn't.
restaurant. That's right.
In the restaurant because we couldn't.
Yeah.
Right, but that was my very first introduction to the community players after auditioning and being in the first show. I helped, and that was my first introduction. I was like, "This is your storage space."
As Lee mentioned, it was across the street from the prison. In fact, it was actually prison property. It was a prison warehouse up there. So, at night, especially, my mother would be needing to go up there alone, Phyllis Stewart, and, she described it to me as being very creepy going in that building, and because it was dark and it was chilly. So.
When we went to leave, the front stairs had been blocked and we couldn't go down, so we had to go down the side stairs. Well, we had big boxes of costumes, and Phyllis was what, 4'8", maybe 4'9",
If that,
somewhere.
if that,
Yes.
right. If that, yeah.
So she's trotting down, and I'm coming along, and all of a sudden I'm going, "Oh, Phyllis!" And she turns around. She says, "What's the matter?" I said, "I'm wedged in the box, my hands, and everything."
And then we moved from there to a place that was equally as dank and dirty. It was on. It actually faces on Store Street. It's known as the Dow Building today. and it's been fully renovated since we were in it. In fact, we were requested to vacate the property years ago so that the renovations could be done on the building, and very worthwhile renovations. But yeah, that place, again, no heat, no running water.
So many dark, dirty places.
Unheated space, as most of our spaces were. So working at the Players Studio was always an adventure in how rugged you were, how much of a New Hampshire person you were.
Remembering Bob Stewart is best left to those who worked with him over his 58 years as a member of the Players. But by the numbers, Bob's record is as inspiring as the man himself. He served the organization working on over 140 productions, including directing more than 25 plays and musicals, mentoring new talent with 19 directors' workshops, and, along with Phyllis Stewart, served as historian for 35 years. His legacy lives on, not only in the studio dedicated to Bob and Phyllis Stewart, but in the mission statement to foster and encourage participation.
Standing up back, I can't hear you, or I don't believe you. Those I remember. And I also remember, clear it up, Greg. My enunciation was horrible. It was, I still have to work at it.
Did a lot of pacing that I recall.
You did a lot of pacing.
Up and down the aisle.
Smoking, too.
Yeah,
Smoking
up and down the aisle. Right.
Constant cigarette.
Yeah. If you came up with something offhanded in rehearsal or even by accident, you were like, oh, you run to the stage. Oh,
yeah,
okay. Now I want you to do that again, but add this to it or make it a little cleaner, and then his eyes would be all lit up. There was that spark.
And he was always open to the actor doing experimentation.
Mm-hmm.
I always felt that he just allowed you, and if he didn't like it, he always told you in a polite way he didn't like it. Afterwards he'd tell you that stunk or something. But no, he was always very, very open to that, which was great. Mm-hmm. And he would build on, like you said, he would build on it.
Yeah, but that enthusiasm, he would rush toward the stage. But,
Me is I never saw him work at home on a script.
Oh, really?
I think rehearsals for him were, he clearly thought about it, but there was a lot of intuitive, in the moment stuff going. Because I don't remember him being home.
That's interesting.
Because I know when you block, I block on paper. I got tons and tons of time.
That's
I do
right.
so much paperwork and paperwork.
I wouldn't set foot in the door.
And I can never remember. I never remember a prompt script.
Yep, never remember him sitting there saying, looking at his script as blocking, said, okay, now you move over such and such.
Yeah.
He didn't. He just watched.
Yep.
And then he started planning there and watching it. You're right. I never thought of that.
Probably led to why he was so open to actors, because he was you did the thing, and okay, I'll respond to that thing that you just did, Steve. Okay, cool. Now we can bring here. He loved rehearsing.
Oh, he did. He loved rehearsals.
And he loved actors.
Yeah.
And he was he was gifted with blocking, stage business, what he would call business.
Oh yeah.
People moving around, and that's the kind of stuff he could think of off the fly.
I was directing a production of Rumors, and for the Players, and something wasn't working. Something wasn't working, and I couldn't put my finger on it. I just knew that it wasn't working, and he, within a minute and a half of watching the scene, told me exactly what was wrong with it, and it just.
Wow.
Yeah. It's like, why didn't I think of that?
Yeah.
It was just so simple, but he said, you got to give them some business, and that always stuck with me. And I give people business to do on stage because it really helps. It helps the actors.
I was very fortunate to have worked with Bob on our 75th anniversary show. I need his expertise on everything, and what he specifically wanted. And I was fine with whoever wanted to be in it or be involved could be. He didn't want to turn anyone away. We had a cast of 85 people. We had 85 people on that stage.
There was no production too big for him to tackle, and he would make it as big as he possibly could.
Put as many people on stage as he
Yep.
possibly could.
Yeah, your poor mother, she just used to go on and on about, he would add cast members. Like the night before the opening night, he would add a cast member and she'd have to come up with a costume.
She would literally get this look on her face, and I would know. And I'd say, he didn't. And she would say, oh, yes, he did. But Esther, this time he didn't add one, he added 3.
And he really believed in mentorship.
Yes, he did.
On both ends.
Yes, he did. He's very strong about that. And sometimes he would bring this up often. He would remind us of the mission statement. And I'm not going to get the wording correct, but to promote, encourage, and foster. And he loved that word, foster. He just seized on that word. He said, because that's what we do here.
Talk about heart. That man had it for the theater. He would come through every snowstorm, every rehearsal, all the way through the winter when we were doing comedy after comedy. Bob Stewart was in the audience checking me. Oh my. I admired him so much, not just as an actor and a director, but as a man who knew what he himself was capable of.
I don't think I would be where I am today without having had Bob in my life. He was my theatrical dad. Bob was a mentor to me for so many shows. When I first started directing, I would ask him to come in and watch rehearsal. I would ask him to give me feedback. I would ask him what makes sense, what doesn't make sense, and he was always right there. And at the same time, he never wanted to stop learning.
I remember him, though, talking to me that he, later on, that he feared, because sometimes he feared that he would see the players and things weren't gelling as much anymore. And he would talk to me, he said, I'm really afraid to see it stop. He always sensed that towards the end. He said, will it be in good hands? And he wasn't, sometimes I don't think he was really sure. He feared that. Yeah. He never wanted it to cease.
The word that he used all the time was commitment.
Yep.
And what frustrated him most
yeah.
in any aspect of production, he sensed people weren't committed. You know, never about ability, but always about effort. People committed to the players ebbed and flowed.
Yeah.
You know, and he really feared, and the players were his life.
I just can't imagine any organization such as this, our beloved players, functioning as long as they did without Bob.
He was so gracious, so giving.
So committed to theater.
Hi, it's me, Sarah Silverman of the Concord Community Players. 34 years ago, I played Annie. Can you believe it?
That was a fun show to do. I think it was fun because it hadn't been done yet. We were the first group to get it.
There was a huge amount of scenery. I made 5 drops that flew in and out. And we painted them at Phoenix Hall, the theater in downtown Concord. We went upstairs, cleaned the room, and put out the drops and painted all 5 of them. We built the set out at the old workshop beside the prison. We also painted in what was then the carriage house of the Kimball Jenkins estate. And we painted some at the Audi because we could at that time.
We had waiting lists of like 150 people. And if there was an empty seat when the show started because someone didn't show up, we just wrote a paper ticket. And then we wrote all kinds of paper tickets for the second balcony and filled that up. It was amazing.
What was it like to work with Sarah?
Well, of course, she was only 12 years old, and she had a clean mouth. She was good. You could tell at the time. You could tell at the time that she had talent. And it was one of those cases where we'd already had auditions, and she came to callbacks because she had missed auditions. And as soon as she opened her mouth, it was like, but. So we cast her as we had 2 Annies. It was not our intention to have 2 when we first started with auditions. But after we saw her, and it was just one of those cases where you couldn't let her go. She was just too good.
In 1983, the players took possession of the property. It was generously donated by Dennis and Elizabeth Hager of Concord. The Hager family is very well known. Dennis's family had owned a number of acres up there on Josiah Bartlett Road, and they had the opportunity. They'd been supporters of the organization for many years and knew we were looking for a place.
I had cast the Hager's little girl in Annie Get Your Gun. And they came to the meeting, and we were talking about the fact that we wanted to build a studio, but we needed property, and the finances, this, how that goes. And they stood up and said, "We have some property. If you'd like it, we're willing to give it to you." And so we said, "Wonderful," and we made all the arrangements with them to get the property, and that's where the studio is now. And it all came because Lucy was in Annie Get Your Gun. I'm very thankful.
And that's when the players started looking for money, and it was difficult. It was very, very difficult. Trying to find someone who would do it.
Yeah, they went to talk to professional fundraisers, and I believe there was an initial survey report put together by a professional fundraiser, looking at the players' vision, where we stand in the community, the community recognition, etc., and basically came back and said, you can't raise the money. You don't have enough community, recognition, blah, 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 and it's never going to happen.
I had set up a database for the players, but got permission from the board to send out fund drive letters, an annual fund drive letter for 3 years to raise funds to build the studio. We also engaged many members to come up with their own projects. Greg Stewart, the son of Bob Stewart, came up with 1 mile of quarters, and he collected quarters until he had 1 mile of them for the studio building project. I think the 3 fund drive letters raised around $21,000.
You mentioned Winnie Lethbridge. I would really like to talk. She was wonderful for fundraising. She came up with this idea of getting as many of the players that we could involve and try to raise money. And she came up with teams. And we had to break up in teams. And she kept on top of it. Every week she'd call and want to know, how we doing? How we doing? How we doing? If we want this building, we need the money.
We started out, and it was probably the most exciting, definitely the most exciting fundraiser that I had ever done, but one of the best committees I had ever worked on, because we became a little group, and every single day was Christmas, because the items were being sent to Esther Crowley's home, because her father was retired, I believe, and so he was always home to receive the item. And so we were meeting, I think, like twice a week, and she would bring the items with her, and then we would sit there at the table and open them. And people sent everything. We got costumes, just all manner of things. A lot of paper, a lot of signed autographs, some facsimile signed autographs, which were not helpful. But it was just an exciting time, and we really loved it. We hated when it was over.
We did all sorts of things, from candy bar sales to selling players' calendars. We did a walk-a-thon at least once, and maybe even twice to do that. So, but the problem was, nothing was bringing in a big bulk of money. Final big fundraiser push was thanks to Irene Duchesne. And I believe the last, before we paid off the mortgage, a lot of the money came out of the show that Irene had directed for the Rotary, and the Rotary had done pretty much as a benefit for the community players.
It really brought us together, though. It's amazing how many it brought the players together. People that just wanted to be somehow involved.
The truism that everything always happens at once was never more apparent to the community players than in 1991, when an old friend in need came calling. The city of Concord finally made good on the on and off rumors that they would be closing their 87-year-old auditorium. Yet for the dozen or more groups which used the Audi, as it was known, closing the 850-seat theater was not an option.
They were searching from Winnie and Carol Kine and Bob Stewart and the Dwellies, the older members. They didn't want to let it go.
In response, a small core of voices to be reckoned with came together with community-based art groups and formed the Friends of the Concord City Auditorium. To date, the Friends have raised over $3 million in local contributions for improvements to the Concord City Auditorium.
Chronology of the building development seemed to be starts and stops, but it had everything to do with money and how much money we had available. So the first thing was getting the site work done. So we did what we could as far as clearing the site.
And Bill Tiffany was the one who came. He was very active in the players. Didn't perform, always did backstage work, but he had all the equipment, trucks and the bulldozers and whatever, and he helped us tear that whole place apart.
So we had some money put together, and the thought was, well, let's get this foundation in. That way, when we go back out fundraising, we have something to show the people. And, this is where your money's going, and we've gotten this far. And the next step then was getting the slab poured. And I think that was poured well before we put the framing up. But the next step then was getting all the framing up and the envelope sealed.
And then it sat kind of just a shell for 4 years, I believe, and around 1995, Betsy Stebbins was president of the Players and convinced the board to move ahead with taking out a mortgage to finally finish the building. We were able to pull on the right people, and for some reason they just happened to be there, but the Players have always managed to attract those people. Players have always been community members. There are people in the community that have an interest in acting or know someone with an interest in acting that have those construction type skills or fundraising skills or whatever the skill happened to be, and we're able to bring them in.
Building community. And if you look into how do you build community, it's having this commonality that everybody shares. And to a certain degree, that studio was a common goal that we all shared. Studio was a focal point for us for many, many years, and it still is. Yeah.
So we had this building constructed. What is beautiful about the main, well, when you first go in, it's a shop, a workshop. It is of the building. The building is, I believe, 60 by 100 or 70 by something to that. The workshop is 60, say it's 60 by 100, 60 by 60, 2 stories high. It allowed us to start doing sets that had second floors and second stories, and we could move them. For example, just a case in point was Noises Off, which is a massive set which has to spin. We never had that possibility before, right? But now we can build stairwells and doors up there and people come in, and we can be mounted in that room, and not only built there, and as it's occasionally being built, the director can start rehearsing things in that place. It was just amazing. It just opened up our world for set design. My whole plan for that was, we have this room. I want to create Sweeney Todd for those people who never had the opportunity to see it professionally on Broadway or touring. And the audience was amazed. You know, we could never have done that. We also have a rehearsal room, which is 30 feet by 30 feet in this same building. We built a room 30 by 30 so we could actually rehearse and stage small shows, whatever, and tape the floor so we could actually see, oh, it does fit. It's going to fit here. It's going to fit on the stage at the auditorium. So now if we do musicals, we can use that room for music and the other side for choreography or blocking or vice versa. So now we have 2 rooms, one the exact size of the city auditorium, and now another place that we can build it.
We even have a gas mask. That's something.
How many pieces total do you probably have?
I'm estimating in excess of 20,000 pieces, individual pieces. That's counting, we have 11,000 things tagged with our inventory tags, which you can...
Computerized.
It's all computerized. But then that's not including purses, shoes, handkerchiefs, gloves, hats, bags, aprons, all sorts of different kinds of things. So, yeah. It's the largest one in the state that, that allows people to come in for no cost and borrow things from us at no cost.
Phyllis and I were doing costumes for On a Clear Day. And there were several regression scenes where the star regresses to a previous period. The second performance of the show, the actress came off and we changed her. And she looked at the dress she had on, which was a regression one, which took some doing getting into. And she said, "This is the wrong dress." And Phyllis and I are going, "No, it's the right dress, Kathy. Get out there, get out there." "No, it's..." And she insisted we change her. Oh. So we changed her. She gets halfway onto stage, runs around, comes back and says, "You were right, get me out of this." So we had to change her again. And she's doing this with her feet while we're trying to change her. Phyllis looked at her and she says, "If you don't stop moving those feet, I'm going to nail them to the floor." After that, she took our word for what she was supposed to be wearing. Dear. I started out doing props, but then very quickly, Phyllis and I got to be friends. Phyllis could do anything with that sewing machine. Yeah. I was very good with a needle and thread or with a pair of scissors.
I do have a picture of you with a needle and thread somewhere. I do. I don't go back as far as this. I've only been in the Players for 40 years. It's 40 years
What's
this
that
year.
tell about us, right?
And I
We're
met
the old crew.
I met Phyllis and Bob the first year I was here, and we got to be friends, and And they were a very huge part of one of the reasons I stuck around for that long, you know. So.
They were very welcoming, I think
Absolutely.
is the way I would put it.
Absolutely.
And Bob loved to teach.
Yeah.
And Phyllis liked to talk. So they made a perfect combination.
Yeah. I can tell that same story from a director's point of view because she costumed The Mystery of Edwin Drood, which I directed.
Oh, yeah.
And it's the same exact thing. She actually sketched out all of the costumes because all of those costumes, the bustles and the bodices, everything was handmade. Some of the men's coats were handmade. You know, and she would come back, she would ask questions that she would fit, and then we'd see it in progress. So she'd have people, have cast members try their costumes on. So we would have fittings way ahead of time. It was a joy to have her because I didn't have to worry about it.
Phyllis was just so good at it. I mean, she truly, she could look at a dress and say, that's such and such period.
I know.
You know, and I'd look at it and say, okay, is that late 1800s, early 1900s? And Phyllis would say, oh, that's 1910. You know, I'm okay.
She absolutely knew it.
Yeah,
she absolutely knew it. And the way that the costume collection is organized now is because of the way that she took care in order to organize those 10 rooms plus the hallways.
I was up there working with her, and she came out, and as they say, she's this tall, but she could get feisty if she wanted to. And she came out of the costume room. She's got this whole handful of plastic hangers. She throws them on the floor, and she said, I hope nobody ever gives me another plastic hanger. They're too big, and I can't handle those, she said. But they're always giving me plastic hangers.
Phyllis was meticulous about what her costumes looked like, what they were going to look like on stage. She didn't care if you stood next to them and you saw a thread that was hanging. But from the stage, it had to be perfect. And that was just the way it was.
Director Karen Braz has been the creative and production resource for the Children's Theatre Project since co-founding it 27 years ago. The project produces one full production every fall, plus 2 week-long theatre camps every season, and accepts children of all experience levels. It is often the first creative theatre experience kids have outside of elementary school. 2 in-house scholarships make participation in the Children's Theatre Project open and available to kids from all backgrounds.
And so I had gone, I still remember this, I was at Bob and Phyllis Stewart's house, and I don't remember if it was a board meeting or if it was a meeting about getting the land for the studio. And I came in and I was like, you know, talking about this idea of children's theater and this and that and blah, 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 and I could direct, and a pall fell over the room. Nobody said anything. I was like, okay, well, I'll just back out slowly. And I think then it was a few years later, they were doing the director's track, and they'd sent me something, you know, oh, you said you were interested in directing. Yes, children. I want to do children.
I really thought it was a great idea to have the children's wing because it grew actors throughout the organization over the years, and that was like really a really cool thing to think about. And to have another kind of legend, another piece of the players keep going and going and going.
So she was one of the original producers, you know, that we kind of co-founded it. Our first show was The Wind in the Willows. We did it at the now defunct Ennick Theater. We had Paul Lang was in it, Mary Deal's son. Maddie Thompson was in there, a bunch of kids. The second show was The Clown Who Ran Away, which was like the 35th anniversary of when Cammie Morrison had played the clown when Bob directed it. The camp started because we had, after The Wind in the Willows, we had a lot of interest in having and continuing, the kids, and we didn't have a show. We had a series of like a makeup workshop and a vocal workshop, and Tracy Knapstead came up and did fencing, and we did this whole thing, and I've got this great picture of all these kids with makeup on, and so that was great, and it was this great little like melodrama thing. And it was a lot of fun. And I just remember thinking at the time, because we had this little tiny boy playing the captain of the ship, and then I remember thinking, now see, this is what camp is for, is to give kids who ordinarily wouldn't ever get that part the chance to do this part. There was one little boy, he was the epitome of what happens with this whole thing. We were at the Anacarico, I'm not sure what camp we were doing, it'll probably make me cry. We were standing in the kitchen area, you know,
very tiny
little kitchen area, and we were getting ready to do it and everything, and he looks up at me, and he was, this big, and he looks at me and goes, "This is the best night of my life." I was like, oh my God.
That's awesome.
I know. So that's the kind of thing that you just don't realize until years later, and kids come back and go, it just meant this and this and this, to me.
We hope to continue this in a very strong sense for years to come.
Absolutely.
This is critical. It's critical to our community,
It is.
Yep.
our organization, and the kids who rely on this.
Well, we always said too, because over the years there are people that are like, they look at me like I've got 9 heads because I work with kids. It's like, they're great to work with. They're great to work with. Don't even think that. And they are the future. If you want patrons of the arts, if you want actors, if you want techies, if you want all of that, this is where they start. And when you listen to the people on Broadway now talk about where they started.
Theater, performing arts, theater.
Music, all of that.
It can be life-changing to a young person. It can show them that they have a way of getting out of themselves. If they're shy and anxious and afraid out there in the real world, they can come into the theater world and pretend they're somebody else for a little while and play around with it and discover parts of themselves that they didn't know existed, which is so
And
cool.
feel safe, right. And particularly if they're not a sports-minded kid,
right,
or they're not particularly academic, they can shine. Right, right. They and some of them are all, it's just a random, it's just a whole random mix of kids, but it means a lot to all of them, I think.
It's changed. When I initially said all these people, older people, etc., I'm the old person now, but I don't see a lot of people I do my age, but they're all gone, they've kind of, I can't do this anymore as much. I will support you, but I can't give you the time. And so the numbers of the people that I know have all the actual numbers have dwindled.
Players were something different. They can't be what they were.
No.
It's a different world.
That's right.
Yeah, because when you talk about there's not enough people that have enough time to devote to doing all the things they used to do in the 50s. But it was a community of people who really cared deeply about the quality of the work that they did.
Yep.
And had really high expectations for one another.
That's right.
And that ebbs and flows too.
I think that there was a fair amount of people who came in and got a lot of practical experience with the group and then took that experience elsewhere. It was kind of a reverse of what was happening in the 50s and 60s. And I think that's because there was and is to this day a growing theater climate in New England where you can take what you learn in one place and bring it someplace else.
Well, now these little groups started springing up. And all of a sudden, we're starting to see our actors slowly disappear. And we're thinking, oh my God, what's holding us a lot together, a lot of theaters, is technical people, because they don't go out as much and do stuff. They're pretty much standard well with this group. So this started getting worse. you know? And I said, what do we've got to bring how are we going to bring the best? We don't have the directors. Now we're losing the actors, and we want to continue. How are we going to do this? If we want to draw them in, we've got to give them a show that they're chomping at the bit. When we did Spamalot, they came from all over the place. But once that show was done, it's like magician. They're gone. So what do? We've got to somehow, have we solved it? No. We're still fighting it. We're still walking that tightrope. And what else can we do? I'm not sure. We just have to keep trying, doing our best.
Here are the players back with this wonderful, dynamic, fun show. And
I'm here because I've been waiting for this for about a year and a half or more.
Oh, thank goodness. We are very happy to have them back.
Oh my goodness, it's wonderful. Tonight's audience was so energy fueling.
I tried out for over a year and a half ago for this show. And so we've been waiting and waiting, and now we did it, yay.
What's wonderful is the generations of the players who are associated with this show. 3 generations of Stewarts and generations of Hodges.
Oh, it's wonderful to be able to bring live theater back here to the audience. 30 years ago this year, I did my first show here with the players. So
what was the name of that? What was that?
You Can't Take It With You.
You Can't Take It With You.
And Betty Lent directed me in that.
Wow.
And Bob Stewart was in the show as Grandpa, and here I am doing a show with his grandson.
Yeah, around August we started back up. I auditioned and they put me in, and I'm very happy.
How was it to join the cast that was already there before?
It felt very welcoming. I felt like I'd been there for weeks.
It's really a gift to Concord that we have such a professional production.
I know people who are very involved in making these shows happen, and it is so delightful to be back now.
It's wonderful. It's a fabulous stage and a fabulous theater, and the group is so wonderful.
It's just, well, it's a good feeling. It's a good feeling for all of us. You know, we just didn't know how long it was going to last. And just to get in here, and the comments from the people as well, the audience is saying it's so nice to be here.
Welcome back. Welcome back, players. Welcome back, everyone. And what a wonderful start for the players moving into their 95th year.
What I got from the players, initially being introduced to them over these years, the thing that I have gotten from them the most, and this would be my order of probably preference, but for each, basically people, starting with the Stewarts, I received so much from them, friendship, family, just his knowledge of the theater, some of the shows he loved, talking about what he would do, how we would approach it. And he became my second eyes. So when I directed, I always called him in. Harriet Strong, for me, I knew about her as a matriarch. And I was so excited meeting this woman who had such knowledge. What I loved about her, she introduced another set of eyes for me. Somehow she opened my eyes to see not just here, but even more. But they gave me the world, so to speak, to be able to direct or to act or to do whatever I wanted to do. And they were so positive. And so that helped me. It gave me self-confidence. These people trusted me, you know? It got to the point that as if sometimes I felt I couldn't do wrong. Yet I knew I could, But they didn't make me feel like I could do wrong. So they opened up the world for me. Do what you think is necessary. And we'll be there to back you. And if you need any help, we're there. So what more could you ask for?
All the people that studied with her, Arthur Boone, Winslow, Ozzie, I think what she instilled in us, what we learned from her, we used. Then we passed it on to the people who worked with us. They, in turn, pass it on to their people.
She kept asking me to get involved with the players, and I kept saying, oh no, I couldn't possibly do that.
I came into the community players through the invitation of a friend and who told me I could design the set for Annie, even though I had no backstage experience at all.
Bob and Phyllis and Carol Kine that taught me really about theater. I didn't know. I mean, I didn't even know what a prop list was or a costume list when I started.
I would ask him to come in and watch rehearsal. I would ask him to give me feedback, and he was always right there.
Within a minute and a half of watching the scene, told me exactly what was wrong with it, and it just, it's like, why didn't I think of that?
Yeah.
You know, it was just so simple.
I'm 97 years old, and I've loved every minute I did Players, except a couple of times when I didn't get the role I wanted and had to bow down, but it was good for the whole. That's what Harriet used to say, I couldn't cast you, I'm sorry. But I have a whole cast to do, and you are just not part of that. I said, can I come watch? That she wanted me to do. And that's where I learned a lot that I didn't know before, because I wasn't in it. I was of it. I've enjoyed this very much.